A lot of the data we're getting that is sensitive, PII, PCI data, other types of payment information, is coming from our customers. So, being in title insurance, our customers are generally the big banks that are out there. So, kind of the shift in mentality that I've had to have coming into FNF, and also I've had to try to change hearts and change minds internally is, while it might not originally be our data, like it or not, we are now the custodians. And as the custodians, we have a requirement to do good by that data.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Future of Data Security. Today I'm speaking with Ward Balcerzak, AVP Director of Data Security at Fidelity National Financial. Ward, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So in your 17 plus years, I looked at your LinkedIn, you've seen all the movies, you've been in this industry for a long time. What's been the most surprising shift that you've witnessed in how we protect sensitive data?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I can't say I've really seen a major shift in how we protect data. The biggest shift I've seen, I remember starting my career and the idea of cloud was new, right? Oh, it's just somebody else's computer and I can access it over the internet. And I remember thinking, what enterprise is going to adopt that, right? What enterprise is going to shift all of their data, let alone their sensitive data, to someone else's computer? So that was, 17, 18 years ago. Then, as everyone who's watching knows, the cloud became the thing, right? Cloud first for many organizations. Now we've got SaaS platforms, all the various IaaS, PaaS, everything. So I think the biggest thing for me as a data security professional has been, now that the defined perimeter is completely gone in many cases, now I have to take some of that traditional thinking of data security and look to apply it to those cloud type locations.
And you guys have a very interesting business. It's a mix of financial services, of course, but also there's a real estate aspect to it. What would you say are some of the unique aspects or challenges in that sector when it comes to sensitive data protection, when it comes to data privacy?
So here at FNF, you're right. We're in financial services. We do a lot with title services. And I would say the most unique part, and I've worked in financial services for a number of years at this point, the most unique part is we're not really creating the sensitive data. A lot of the data we're getting that is sensitive, PII, PCI data, other types of payment information, is coming from our customers. So, being in title insurance, our customers are generally the big banks that are out there. So, kind of the shift in mentality that I've had to have coming into FNF, and also I've had to try to change hearts and change minds internally is, while it might not originally be our data, like it or not, we are now the custodians. And as the custodians, we have a requirement to do good by that data, right? Make sure that it's all protected as expected. And with that comes a lot of B2B communications. So going back to the whole cloud piece of the pie, instead of kind of the legacy or traditional, I'm going to send you data via email, you're going to send it back. It's relatively easy to put kind of barriers around that, encrypt it and whatnot. Now it's actually having portal type or API type applications that we are just transmitting back and forth with those customers. So it's been interesting to come out of your traditional financial services type of organization like I did, and then come to this side where, yeah, we're still financial services, but we're not necessarily the creators of this data.
And are there any new or exotic data types that stem out of the real estate sector in particular when compared to a bank, let's say?
It's a good question. So, no, not really. I get this question a lot. Like, what kind of data do you actually see? And when folks hear about title insurance, they're like, what sensitive data would you actually have, right? Like, what do you do? I always equate it back because most people I talk to, they've bought a home before, right? If you've bought a home, you go to close out, you go to the closing, and they get this huge packet of papers, and they say, "Congratulations, you're about to sign your life away, and your hands can be cramped up after with all the times you have to sign." And in that packet, you have credit history information. You've got, the actual loan information. If you think about all that, you've got your PII, you've got maybe your spouse's PII, potentially in your credit history, you might have some other sensitive information in there. So I'm not seeing anything exotic, but the packets of information, the density of the sensitive information is something I haven't necessarily seen in some of my other financial services organizations.
When it comes to protecting data, talking about unstructured data, structured data, files versus databases as an example, what are the unique challenges with both? How do you address specifically protecting unstructured data?
This is a really good topic, structured and unstructured, and I'll actually bring them both together. So, structured data, databases, and whatnot. I would say that's relatively easy to understand the types of data you have in there because typically in structured, right, you've got tables, rows, and columns, and you can typically get a feeling of, okay, I'm going to have sensitive data or not sensitive data. Where it gets tricky with the structured side is when you have a combination thereof. You've got unstructured data within the structured. And then that always gets fun to kind of dive down and figure out how to understand what the data is and how to protect it. Now, the pure unstructured side, oh man, is that the Wild West? Pretty much every organization I've worked in or with, they don't really have a good grasp on it. And the reason being is that data could be anything and it could be anywhere. So again, you go back to the more traditional, the on-prem, you typically have your file servers, you'd have your hard drives like laptops, desktops, maybe removable media would fit in that as well. You've got a lot of that still in our new world of cloud, but now you have to think about the hybrid, right? The hybrid thereof. And it could be the same thing, right? You could have data sitting in a container, blob storage, whatever. So when it comes to first understanding, classifying, then securing, it becomes an exercise of first understanding the inventory, right? What do we actually have? What are the repository types and data types we have? That's where it has to first start, right? If I don't have cloud, great. I don't have to worry about, cloud-based discovery tools or classification tools to do that. I would say that's probably rare. There's probably next to no organizations that they fit in that anymore. So again, it really comes down to what do I have from a data perspective? Where does it exist? Start to build that inventory and then start to say, okay, what am I actually going to do to trust but verify? Right? Because when I start understanding what I have, that usually comes from interviews with stakeholders. Hey, legal department, what's your data? Where do you store it? What's its sensitivity? You'll get an answer. Awesome. Now, hey, HR department, what do you have? Where is it? You'll get another answer. Then maybe you'll go to your IT department and they'll kind of fill in oh yeah, HR told you it's here, but it's actually like they're putting in this share, but it's actually OneDrive, right? So it's technically Microsoft, cloud services. Then comes the trust but verify, right? I'm trusting everything I just heard. Now I'm looking to either use a tool or scripts or whatever to actually perform discovery scans or just discovery in general to say, hey, okay, I heard you. You say you don't have sensitive information on OneDrive, but survey says, look at all the sensitive information. Now, what do we do about it? So again, it'll start with the inventory, then I'll start with the discovery, and then you'll have this big list of things that you're going to do something about. Protect it, and there's various forms or ways to protect that information depending on what it is and where it sits.
You make a very good point that I think a lot of people share in the industry, which is you need the inventory, you need the ground truth of where the data is. Do you see any specific data sources as riskier or more challenging to control than others? For example, maybe workstations versus file servers.
So, the short answer is yes. Not all risk is the same across various data types or repository locations. I think once upon a time, before cloud and before SaaS, our jobs were a little bit easier from a data security perspective. We could kind of assume that the perimeter was the perimeter and your wild card was your endpoint, right? Your endpoint was leaving. If it was a laptop, it was leaving your office locations. It could get stolen. It could get connected to kind of a risky network location. And yeah, your data could leave. But, your perimeter hopefully was relatively rigid and not squishy and wasn't really exposed. Again, now with cloud, and when I say cloud, I'm not just talking about Azure, AWS. I'm talking about SaaS applications, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Box.com, you name it. It gets really, really tricky. And it gets really, really tricky because the discovery or security capabilities are not uniform across all those solutions. You are kind of, in some cases, hamstringed by what is available to you. So, Microsoft, for example, Microsoft offers a lot of capabilities depending on your licensing structure. If you're an E5 customer, you've got some security tools available to you. Even if you're not an E5 customer, you can get some of that ad hoc, and that's great, right? A lot of that uses Microsoft APIs, a lot of that is built in natively, and you can start to get a feel for what is my data, how is it stored, how is it shared, and, i.e. exposed, all that kind of good stuff. When you think about something like, I guess I'll pick on Salesforce, it's a little bit different. So Salesforce has some native things that you can leverage. If you don't want to leverage that, now you're kind of thinking, all right, what am I going to do? And you're typically limited to APIs, right? What are the APIs that platform, Salesforce or others, are going to expose to me and let me do? And in some cases, those APIs are visibility only, meaning you could peek in, you can see how big the issue is, but you can't do a darn thing about it, all right? You can't actually quarantine email, you can't encrypt it and whatnot. So it gets very tricky about what's the total risk, what's my total exposure, but it all goes back to that inventory. So again, when I look to create an inventory, obviously I'm looking what's internal, what things do we manage, right? And Salesforce could be something we manage. ServiceNow could be something we manage. But when you start to think about some of the free services out there, like document conversion sites or some of the other free things you could get, that's where it's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Am I going to play maybe whack-a-mole and shut these things off? Not let folks use them? Or am I going to let the business use what they need, but look to secure the data in a slightly different way? CASB, DLP, you name it. So there's not an easy answer for you, but it really goes back to, for each organization, what do we know we use? And then looking to close the gap on what don't we know yet through monitoring, looking at logs and whatnot.
You make a very good point with, of course, what we know we might be using. But I speak to a lot of professionals nowadays, and Gen AI and Shadow AI is a big team. Everyone knows that employees are, sending emails to their personal accounts. Maybe they'll do something out there. How has the Gen AI era changed your perspective on data security? Any thoughts you can share for the audience on that emerging topic?
Yeah. I've been to a handful of conferences and talks this year, and they all come back to this great topic of AI and Gen AI. And here's the thing, it's here to stay, right? It's not going away. A lot of people thought initially, hey, this is a fad. People never use it. And then the business, the business and business users out there started getting a taste for it, right? They saw OpenAI and said, "Oh my goodness, I can have it create an email for me. That's grand." Or, I can leverage AI to do data analysis for me, and I'm not spending hours doing it. That's amazing. And there is a lot of amazing capabilities that are coming in this new era of AI, generative AI, machine learning, etc. Some of these concepts have been around for a very long time, but not at the level it is today. So, what are folks doing about it? I remember conversations I had internally about a year and a half ago or so where my executive leaders were really scared initially. They said, holy cow, somebody could go to OpenAI and just upload sensitive data, and now we've got no control over it potentially. Like, that's bad. And the initial reaction was, let's turn it off. shut it off to the entire enterprise, don't let people use it. Well, I mean, that resulted in a lot of rumblings, right? Folks would end up using, these types of applications in their day to day. Maybe they had, a side gig, a side business. Maybe they came in new from somewhere else and they started saying and evangelizing, like, look at all these efficiencies that I can bring with these types of services. So since then, we've had to determine how do we actually allow the usage of these services in a secure manner. And that's all come back to governance at the end of the day. So we've had to build some governance processes to say, look, here's what we're okay with. Here's how we can secure these various platforms. We have brought in an in-house AI capability as well, kind of as a first thing, like, hey, you want to use this? This is cool. Use ours because the data never leaves, right? It's in our tenant and it doesn't leave FNF at all. So that's where I see a lot of companies going, right? Trying to wrap some governance processes around to make sure they understand how is AI being used, how should it be used, and what are the use cases, what's the data, and then once the governance model is there, then coming back maybe at the same time, maybe behind with security to do the trust but verify, i.e., hey, employees, we're going to trust that you can use, with great power comes great responsibility. We're going to trust that you can use these services securely and with business use cases. But oh, by the way, we're going to have some controls to ensure that you don't put, intellectual property, PII, you name it, within these services. So our data doesn't all of a sudden become, part of somebody's, LLM essentially at that point.
I'm curious, what would you say is the most effective way that you've tried or even have considered to date to prevent the PII or other sensitive data from being ingested in these Gen AI tools?
So I would say it's a still trial and error. I think a lot of companies would agree that we're all struggling trying to figure this out. Being in the data protection industry for quite a while, when I think prevention, fortunately slash unfortunately, my mind always starts to gravitate towards data loss prevention technologies, right? Which we all know, right, there's plenty of ways around it, right? They're not perfect, but really no tool is. So where I always where I always try to start, and here at FNF with Gen AI has been no different. I try to start with monitoring first, i.e., how the heck are people using these things? And, back a year and a half ago, when my leadership was concerned, that's where we started. We said, okay, like, I hear you. There's a concern. Let's block certain things. Let's allow access to others. And let's just watch. Let's watch to see how people are using it because we'll have assumptions on how people are using it, but that might not be accurate. And we found just that, right? We saw certain assumptions that, oh yeah, people are going to use it to craft emails, or people were using it to craft checklists for maybe operational processes, all the good things that again Gen AI is good at and should be used for. However, we did start to see some other usage where people weren't really thinking about, hey, I'm looking to craft this email, but shoot, there's some customer data in it, and that shouldn't go into the Gen AI platforms. So what we did after that learning, we were able to come together. We do have a whole, digital group within FNF. We were able to sit down and say, awesome, here's the good ways the business is using it. Here's the maybe risky ways, and look to again put in some governance, look to build something internally, and then look to have some controls to prevent some of that risky stuff. So again, thinking DLP, right? Preventing the upload of SSNs, payment card information, all that into it. It's not perfect. I don't know that we'll ever be perfect, but it's definitely the way that we're starting to tiptoe because, again, we've got the prevention, but then we also got the visibility. So as we see some additional risky behaviors, we can sit down from a kind of an incident response perspective and say, oof, that was ugly or that was bad. How do we prevent that going forward based on what we just saw within the tool?
I like that you keep highlighting trust but verify, and perhaps we could extend that to educate, trust, and ultimately verify. I talked to a lot of insiders again, and it seems that policies and Procedures are often very well written, beautiful on paper, but it's always a challenge to do policy enforcement and assess whether or not people are doing the right thing. Any thoughts on that topic?
A lot of thoughts around that topic, and I think I've dealt with it in every company I've worked for. So having written policies is great, right? I think it's incredibly important. But having actual teeth behind the policies, actual controls to enforce them, or even, what could happen if you violate those policies? It could be HR getting involved or whatever. That's where I see some organizations start to falter. I'll tell you, kind of a bigger issue I've seen lately is not having policies, right? Trying to enforce controls without a policy to back you, because then you constantly have the user saying, well, where's the policy that says I can't do that? What do you mean I can't do that? And bringing it back to Gen AI, we had just that. So we were trying to control access to generative AI services, but we didn't have an AI or generative AI policy in place that said, how can you use it? How can't you use it? Which services you can use? So there was this animosity that was forming from the business that says, you gosh darn security folks, you're preventing me from doing my job. Let me do my job, because there's no policy that says I can't. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues in having a policy but not enforcing it. But I would say there's also a lot of issues in enforcing things but not having a policy to back you.
Switching gears a little bit, is there in your 17 years a defining moment in your career or something interesting that happened that you'd want to highlight specifically?
I mean, yes and no. So I started my career in the front lines. I was very blessed in my first job where I was the frontline security guy. It was me. It was me and my boss. And as such, I got to do just about everything in security, pen testing, red teaming, data security. I was just in there, sitting in a sim all day long, looking at logs, all of those things. And I would never trade that experience for anything. So, I started as a technologist at the front lines. I got to see how people try to circumvent security, right? Again, this was, 17, 18 years ago. Security was relatively new, and the business was like, no, the heck with you. I want to go to this website, or I want to do that thing. And, they weren't necessarily being malicious, but they were just trying to do their jobs to get around security. It was very kind of broadsword or hammer approach. Everything was a nail, security was the hammer sort of thing. I think the defining moment in my career came around the same time I started to move into leadership positions, where now instead of being the front line doing the work, now I was interfacing with the business. I was helping to build policy and procedure. And that was around the same time that security was also taken seriously, finally, by the business, by executives. And it was great because now having those frontline experiences, I was able to have those conversations with folks saying, great, like we're now at the big boy table. you're now understanding and throwing money at us. I also understand your difficulties and what you're trying to do. And that really helped me to be able to say, instead of no to everything, here's a better way. One of my first mentors actually said this as a performance review. And they said, Ward, you're really good at being the master of no, N-O. I need you to be the master of no, K-N-O-W. Idea was, no, you can't do this, but you should do it this way, or here's the better way of do it.
Putting all this in perspective, is there a piece of advice you'd give to a younger Ward or someone that's starting in the industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice, and I give this to a lot of my team members today, is try to bring your head above the issue, the incident, the whatever in question that's right in front of your nose, right? Because insecurity, data security, or otherwise, there's always a fire. There's always a fire going. There's always something we're trying to accomplish. And the biggest issue I see is, as folks see the issue, they sprint to solve the issue instead of think about it a little bit higher, strategically, if you will, bring your head above the trees a little bit, look at the problem and say, am I solving for a little piece of the problem, i.e. what I see, or is there something bigger I'm looking to solve for here? And I wish I would have known that way back, because I can't tell you how many times I would see something, I would sprint to fix that something, And then I'd see something similar, but it wasn't fixed because it was slightly different, right? I didn't have a solution for that. And I could have saved myself a lot of time, the company a lot of money and a lot of heartache by just bringing myself out of the problem a little bit to say, all right, am I solving for something tactically or am I solving for it strategically? And sometimes you have to go tactically, right? Sometimes you got to plug that hole. But think of it like a sinking ship. If I got a lot of holes, am I literally just sticking my finger in one hole and it's coming out another? Or am I actually putting tar or whatever to plug all the holes at the same time?
Looking ahead at everything that's happening, where the market is going, what's one bold prediction you have for the future of data security?
Yeah, okay. Bold prediction. So, being at a lot of conferences this year, I'm seeing a lot of the vendors out there. DSPM is kind of the hot topic, data security posture management, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of people saying this is the new thing. In fact, I've talked to a lot of leaders and they're all hearing, kind of the marketing hype around DSPM. My bold prediction is DSPM will probably go away, at least not the idea of DSPM, but I think the marketing hype around DSPM will go away. And I think what's going to happen is instead of a platform that does this, we're going to start to see similar controls start to bake that in, right? So instead of having a platform that sits across everything and integrates via API or via credentials or whatever, we're going to see more of those capabilities baked in natively to our cloud environments, into our SaaS applications, into email, into you name it. And that's going to be good and bad, right? It's going to be good because there'll be a air quotes easier way to integrate and get that visibility. The bad is that's going to start to produce operational overhead, right? You're going to have security teams or IT teams start to, unfortunately, go back to the swivel chair approach, right? I'm in this tool doing this thing and this tool doing that thing. So I think that's what's going to happen from data security. We are starting to see that just in general. That's kind of been the way the market's been going for the last couple of years. What I'm going to be interested about is how or what vendors are going to stand up and say, I'm going to solve again for the swivel chair and make things better. And that's where I'm seeing, going back to AI and ML, I'm starting to see some players out there start to create these, I hate to call it a platform, maybe it's more middleware, but these tools that assist with kind of managing those point solutions and have some AI capabilities baked into them.
I'm going to steal that swivel chair analogy. I like it. Unfortunately, that's all we're going to have time to cover today. But before we wrap, Ward, if people want to follow along with your work, with what you're up to, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm big on LinkedIn. Probably on LinkedIn a little too much. I'm on there daily. I'm always looking for connections. So definitely feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have conversations. I'd love to connect with folks in other industries or data security. But I'm a big fan of networking and trying to put all of our heads together to solve these big issues when it comes to securing our organizations.
Amazing. Well, this has been really fun for me, very insightful. Let's keep in touch, and thank you again for joining.
Thank you for having me.